my fellow weirdos, welcome back to my channel. For today's video we're doing a reading wrap up, which is essentially a review of the books I have been reading and listening to over the past couple of months. If you have read any of these books, let me know what you thought down in the comments below, if you agreed with me, if you didn't agree with me, and if you have any recommendations based on what I like. I always love to hear them, so put them down there too. But without further ado, we're going to jump straight into things. First up, we have Little Eve by Katrina Ward. This is the third book I've read by Katrina Ward. I really love her style of writing. It's kind of in vein with other kind of gothic style writers I really like Angela Carter and Shirley Jackson. It takes place in Scotland on a little island called Almahara, which is like a little kind of enclave island just off the shore, and the path to it, when the tide is in, you can't get to the island, it's cut off, and the tide goes back out and you can kind of walk in. And Eve, our protagonist, lives there with her family. It's a collection of orphans and their uncle. He has adopted them and is raising them in a cult, essentially. They believe that the adder, who is this god, this giant serpent, is going to kind of bring about a sort of rapture at some point, and only those who believe are going to be saved. And they do rituals like with the adder, where they're supposed to be able to see the future and things, and they take honey, which is made with the bees who have like special flowers on the island that they take their honey from, so it's like very special honey because these flowers only grow on this island, and things like that. And they do these ceremonies where they trip out and where snakes bite them and stuff like that. And Eve, essentially we follow her as she realizes that everything that she has been raised in, everything she believed in, isn't true, that her uncle is not a good person, that she needs to get out of there, and so does her sisters. And it's a really wonderful look into the kind of cult psychology, into how they maintain that control over people. It's got a really brilliant look at the kind of ups and downs of feelings that would be experienced by somebody who's kind of wrestling with the beliefs, the whole system with which they were raised, and they're wrestling with what, believing it, denial, anger, all that sort of stuff. It's just a really great example of that kind of cult vibe. So if you like things to do with cults, if you like traditional kind of gothic horror as well, this is very much in that vein. So two reasons why you would really enjoy this. Plus there's also a kind of mystery element to it, where you've got a police officer who knows fine rightly that what's happening in this island is abuse, and he is trying to do something about the kids, and he's also trying to find Eve later, find out what happened to Eve later, because it keeps kind of going between the past and the present. So I really enjoyed it. I didn't like it as much as Last House on Needless Street. Like for me, she just like, oh, it was such a page turner. I enjoyed that book so much. But I would say that it is definitely on par with Sundial, the other book I read by her. So I would say it's a solid 4 out of 5. I definitely recommend it. Next, we have one that's The Salt That Grows Heavy by Cassandra Caw. This and Little Eve were both gifted to me by the publishing houses, by the way, so thank you for that. So this is my first read of Cassandra Caw. She also wrote a book called Nothing But Blackened Teeth, which I remember seeing everywhere all over Bookstagram, but I've never actually got around to reading that. I'm going to plan on reading that now I have read this one. But this is The Salt Grows Heavy. It's hard to kind of describe this book because most books spend a good deal of their writing world building and creating context for the story. They sort of set up, this is the world, this is the way the world is, and this is where our story is happening, and then they kind of make it more specific to the story. The way that Cassandra writes is the story's halfway through. We're halfway through what's happened in this particular place with these particular characters, and she just plops you in the middle of it, right in the middle of all the carnage. And it's kind of discombobulating, but in a really good way, because it, for me, is brilliant at emulating dreams. You know when you have really weird trippy dreams? and there's no context, there's no world building. You just are suddenly in a plane, or you are suddenly in a field, and suddenly these people are with you, this actor is with you, this character, this thing is happening. There's no explanation, you don't know why it's happening, and you just go along with it. That's what this really invokes. You're just plonked in the middle of this world where you have this plague doctor character who is friends with a cannibalistic mute mermaid. And it just begins with them watching her children, her half mermaid, half human children, just eating their way through a destroyed city. And her and the plague doctor have a sort of understanding, like a friendship. And it's just them going on from the town after it's been destroyed and finding a place in the world, kind of thing. And then it sort of addresses her past and his past as we follow along, and it's just really very dream-like book. The writing is it's very beautiful, very poetic, and it really helps with that kind of dreamlike quality. She describes things in such a beautiful way. Even when they're very disgusting, they're still somehow kind of beautiful because they're part of this dream. It's really hard to explain, but it's honestly just a really, really wonderful read, and it's like no other writing I've ever read before. I really, really enjoy it. And what I love best about this is it's not just your typical kind of horror. Well, there's nothing typical about this book, but it's not a horror alone. It's also a love story between the mermaid and the plague doctor, and it's just, oh, I loved it so much, and I found myself genuinely like really rooting for these people, and I shed tears over this book. Like, it's really, I mean, it's not a big book. It's like I said, you're plunked in the middle of this situation with no context, and somehow she still completely draws you in, and in so few pages has you feeling so many emotions. I loved it. It is a solid 5 out of 5 for me. I genuinely thought this was wonderful. Next we have a book which is non-fiction. It's actually more like a self-help kind of book. It's called Why Does He Do That? Encouragement for Women Involved with Angry and Controlling Men by by Lundy, Bancroft. This is essentially like a workbook. It's recommended by a lot of charities over here to help women who have to deal with controlling people, angry people, and it gives you sort of like a little work program, like a task to do every day. I combined the tasks and I did it over 50 days, and I journaled my journey through the book, and I have to say I found it very, very insightful. I can see why the charities recommend it. It's very validating because I'm being very careful with my language because of YouTube, but when you're in a situation where it's a toxic sort of situation with a person, you can sometimes feel very isolated, and you can sometimes feel like you're kind of losing your mind, and it's like, am I being crazy, or am I being stupid, am I asking too much, am I the bad guy? And you find yourself questioning things a lot. When you open the pages of this book and you honestly feel like they're just like looking at your situation and they're describing it on paper, it's like they've listened to your conversations and your arguments, they've seen what's happening. It's very reassuring and validating to know that you're not on your own and you're not the only person who's experienced something like this, so that really helps. And then it answers and deals with some very tricky questions. A lot of it may not it might not apply to specific people because it's sort of specific types of relationships, specific types of situations, but you can kind of work your way through and pick out what works for you, and I find it incredibly useful and genuinely very interesting to read, especially the sort of psychology behind a lot of it. It kind of breaks down like why these types of people, these kind of angry, controlling people, why they behave the way that they do, and it's very interesting. So I would give it a good 4 out of 5. I think if you are in a situation where you would find that useful, I definitely recommend that as something to give a try. Then we have a few audiobooks that I listened to. First up we have Joyland by Stephen King. It is a story about Dev, a young man who works through the summer holidays between school, college, at a theme park, a small theme park called Joyland. and he comes to hear a legend about the haunted horror house because 10-15 years ago, whatever it was, a young woman went in with her date, and halfway along in the dark of the horror ride he unalived her and left her beside the train, and she wasn't found until the morning because everybody else coming through the ride thought she was a prop. And apparently her ghost still haunts the place, and he becomes engrossed in trying to sort of unravel that case. So you've got this murder mystery element, you've got the paranormal element with the ghost, then you've got this kind of shining element because you have psychic people in it. You've got Rosie, whose shining is a little bit, she's like the fortune teller, and it's all very theatrical, and she puts on a fake European kind of accent and dresses up and does the whole crystal ball thing. But sometimes she's right, sometimes she does genuinely see things. And she tells him that he's going to meet a little girl, a little boy. One of them has the sight, and she doesn't know which one it is, but they're both going to be really important. And that's exactly what happens. The little boy is the one with the sight, and together, I don't want to spoil it, but there's this crime element, this paranormal element, this psychic element. It's a really, really interesting read. I love coming of age stories in general, and this is very much one of those where he is kind of discovering himself and deciding what he wants out of life, out of relationships. He gets his heart broken, and then he discovers love, and not the usual kind of love, and you know, kind of grows up a lot throughout the book. I would say that there is a genuine obsession with losing his virginity in it. There's a lot of sex talk, but I do find that with a lot of Stephen King books, that there always is a sex element to a lot of the stories. There's always some kind of naughtiness going on, which, you know, fair enough. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. I found it genuinely entertaining, and there was times where I was reading it I was listening to it on the commute, the audiobook, and I would stop and sit in my car just because I couldn't go in. I needed to hear the end of that particular chapter, so that's always a really good sign. I then listened to two kind of novella short stories. First of all, we had The Man in the Black Soot, which is another Stephen King story. This is about a little boy who goes fishing near a creek, and at the crossroads of the creek he meets a man in a black suit. It's the devil, and the devil tells him his mum is dead, threatens to eat him. It's really creepy, the description of this guy. It sounds like something that would give me nightmares for life if it ever actually happened to me. I thoroughly enjoyed that story. I'm not sure what collection that story's in, because it was just a standalone audiobook, but really, really, really enjoyed that. I love the whole concept of the devil at the crossroads. Finally, we had The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. I'm going to do a kind of deep dive video, which is the book versus movie in that, but essentially it is the town of Sleepy Hollow, our protagonist Ichabod Crane. Nature of this area where everybody's really into ghosts and like weaving stories, and Ichabod loves all this. He's like the local teacher, and bit of an odd character. Really, I've never read a story, I listened to, I've never heard a story which is like, there's so many descriptions of food. Like, I don't know if Washington Irving was like a really big eater or whatever, but there are like, so much of the hour and a half that I listened to was dedicated, I'd say like 30-40 minutes of it were just him talking about food. About the food that they grow in Sleepy Hollow, the food that they eat in Sleepy Hollow, the different cakes and buns and just so much detail about the food. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. I do love classic fiction. I love the way that they wrote back then. It just has a wonderful quality that they don't evoke anymore with the language of modern literature. I loved the sense of humor about it. It's very much not taking itself seriously, so I thought it was a really fun one to listen to on the commute as well. So that's it. I'm nearly finished another book, so I'll do another wee wrap up, another couple of books, what I'm doing at the minute soon. I'm hoping to post a little bit more often. But again, if you have any recommendations, if you agree, disagree, leave it a little comment, like the video, hit the bell, subscribe, all that jazz that helps with the algorithm gods. You know what it's like on here. And I'll see you next time. Bye.